2, 1.
7 things you probably didn't know you need to know. I'm Jamie East, and this is the Standout 7.
Over the next 7 minutes or so, we're going to look back on a week where the government's Rwanda plan flopped, new legislation put the Northern Ireland Protocol in jeopardy, the US congressional hearings got more details on Trump's attempted coup, and Kylie Minogue said goodbye to Ramsey Street. This is the Standout 7 from the Smart 7. Don't forget to hit that follow button to get your daily updates at 7 a.m. In the end, the first plane for Rwanda never took off from Ministry of Defence base Boscombe Down on Tuesday. A flurry of court appeals and eventually an appeal to the European Court of Human Rights saw the number of asylum seekers facing deportation gradually drop until it appears there was no one left. The government's policy, which has been criticised by the Church of England, including the Bishop of Manchester, opposition leaders and civil rights groups, may eventually lead to the UK pulling out of the European Convention for Human Rights. But Boris seems determined.
Will it be necessary to change some laws to help us as we go along? It may very well be. All these options are under constant review.
Foreign Secretary Liz Truss wasn't worried about how few people were on the flight. She says the whole exercise is intended to send a message.
The point is that we want to establish the principle of this route. We need to make sure that people are going to Rwanda and we break the business model of these people traffickers.
Labour's Shadow Culture Secretary says the whole thing's a huge mistake.
We think this policy is unworkable. It's going to cost possibly over £1 million per unsuccessful or successful refugee going to Rwanda. And we do think it's unethical and it's quite un-British, actually.
Boris Johnson's attempt to reset the agenda after Partygate came unstuck on Wednesday as his ethics advisor Lord Geidt resigned. It followed a grilling by MPs at a parliamentary hearing on Tuesday, at which he really struggled to answer the question, had he considered resigning?
I think it's fair to say that it's always, I've mentioned that there are a few instruments available to an independent advisor.
It came after a day of rows about the Rwanda flight that had to be cancelled following an intervention from the European Court of Human Rights. The government's response has been to consider whether or not to pull out of the ECHR, which underpins the Good Friday Agreement and would see Britain join only Russia and Belarus as countries not covered by the Human Rights Framework. Home Secretary Priti Patel was determined that the Rwanda plan will still go ahead.
While this decision by the Strasbourg court to intervene was disappointing and surprising given the repeated and considered judgments to the contrary in our domestic courts, we remain committed to this policy.
Meanwhile, her Labour counterpart Yvette Cooper branded the policy of flying asylum seekers to Rwanda as government by gimmick.
Our country is better than this. We've a long tradition of hard work and stepping up to tackle problems, not to offload them, to tackle the criminal gangs who put lives at risk and to do right by refugees.
The government finally moved to introduce new legislation on Monday which will overrule parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the new bill, which will now allow it to ignore parts of the Brexit deal it agreed in 2019, does not in fact break international law.
We're doing this in a way that protects the EU single market, that makes sure they receive information about what goods are crossing the Irish Sea. So we are maintaining the core principles of what we're doing, and we are acting within international law.
The legislation's been greeted with disappointment by Irish Taoiseach Micheál Martin.
It's very regrettable, and for a country like the United Kingdom to renege on an international treaty is something that I think does represent a new low point.
There was also criticism from the Labour Party, in Northern Ireland from Sinn Féin, and from the European Commission, who said they viewed the plan with significant concern. The legislation depends on what it calls the doctrine of necessity, and Boris Johnson continues to claim that the protocol, which he agreed to and signed off on, is causing real issues in Northern Ireland.
We've got a problem at the moment, which is that in Northern Ireland, the Stormont Assembly, the government of Northern Ireland, can't meet because of the effects of the protocol. What it does is it creates unnecessary barriers on trade east-west.
Thursday saw a train full of visitors arrive into Kyiv with French President Macron, Italian PM Draghi, German Chancellor Scholz and Romanian President Iohannis all on board. They arrived to the sound of air raid sirens, but the visit was without incident and the leaders toured the city and pledged more military support and that Europe would stand with Ukraine. They also made clear that they would back Ukraine's candidacy for EU membership. President Zelensky expressed his thanks for the support and warned that Russia remains a threat to Europe.
Today, Ukrainians are in the front line, fighting against the Russian strikes, but we are not alone.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also had words of condemnation for Russia.
It's very clear this aggression on Ukraine marks the change of a time, of an age. And what Russia is doing here is unacceptable.
Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov sat down with the BBC to explain that Russia felt it had to begin its offensive on Ukraine because of NATO.
We didn't invade Ukraine. We declared a special military operation because we had absolutely no other way of explaining to the West that dragging the Ukraine into NATO was a criminal act.
Still to come on the Standout 7, we hear more on Donald's coup attempt, and Kylie says see ya, Cobber, to Ramsey Street. Right after this. Welcome back.
A suspect in the case of the missing British journalist Dom Phillips and Indigenous activist Bruno Pereira has confessed to the killings and taken police to a potential site where the bodies were buried. Two suspects, brothers Amarildo and Osne de Costa de Oliveira, were arrested after police found personal items from the missing men in a river on Sunday. Investigators have now recovered human remains and the police are working with Interpol to confirm the identities. The second suspect denies any involvement. At a press conference in Amazonas State, federal police investigator Eduardo Alexandra Torres said the confessions helped locate the bodies deep in the forest.
It was realised following an international methodology, and then we went to the place where he said he had buried the bodies and where he had hired the boat. He sank the boat as the investigations was showing us. This was the place where the criminal event happened, where we found the personal belongings, and the location where we found the bodies are here, 3.1 kilometres deep in the forest.
The third public hearing of the January 6th Congressional Committee took place on Thursday evening with a focus on Mike Pence and the pressure that Donald Trump applied to try and get him to overturn the results of the election. Witnesses include Conservative Judge Michael Luttig, who warned that Donald Trump's plot was a war on democracy and that he himself would have gone to any length to stop it.
I would have laid my body across the road before I would have let the vice president overturn the 2020 election.
The committee also showed footage of Trump cranking up the pressure on Pence to discount electoral votes, as well as the reaction from the rioters when they learned he would not do so.
I'm hearing reports that Pence caved. I'm telling you, if Pence caved, we're going to drag motherfuckers through the streets.
She first rose to fame as Charlene back in the 1980s on Australian soap Neighbours, but now she's a bit better known as Kylie Minogue. And after a 37-year run, the high-quality Australian soap opera is finally wrapping up. Kylie and a few other successful graduates, including Guy Pearce, went back for a final reunion.
It was emotional going back to the set and felt beautiful, actually. The fact that we could see each other. I haven't seen these people in, some of them, for over 30 years.
This has been the Standout 7, the best of the week from the Smart 7. We'll be back tomorrow, 7 a.m. with the Sunday 7. Have a great rest of your weekend. Written, produced and published by Daft Doris.